Hey, Crawlspace listeners, we wanted to bring you an episode that recently aired on our other podcast, Missing.
So for any listener who doesn't know, like you said, Tim, we have two shows, and we always want to air episodes of Missing on Crawlspace when they are appropriate and relevant.
Okay, and that's what we are bringing you here today, so please make sure to like and subscribe and follow us on social media. Thanks a lot for listening.
This dude lived and breathed serial killing. He's a planner. He's an architect. I think he had a whole blueprint in his brain for how he was going to do this. And here's the thing. He did. He got away with it for a long time. We know his first victim is in 1993. I believe that there's another victim previous to that.
In today's new episode of Missing, we speak with filmmaker and podcaster Joshua Zeman about serial killer Rex Heuermann and Josh's work looking into the Long Island serial killer. This conversation is great. I think you'll really enjoy it, and I think you'll really love Josh's work. So check out his podcast, Monster. Also follow him on YouTube at Sinister Podcast JZ, and there are links in the show notes for all of this. Thank you so much for listening. Please let us know what you think on YouTube or Spotify, and follow us on social media at Missing CSM. We're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be right back with Joshua Zeman. Welcome back to the podcast. Joshua Zeman, how are you today?
Guys, how you doing?
And we're doing great. It's great to have you back on the show. We had such a great conversation when you first joined us, and it got such a great reaction, too. There's something about having someone as well-researched and dedicated on the show that really draws out the best in people. Do you mind reintroducing yourself for the listeners, a little bit about your past and, just to familiarize folks?
Sure. My name's Joshua Zeman. I guess I'm a documentary filmmaker. I started out doing a lot of docs, did a kind of an early true crime doc called Cropsey that I guess was one of the first horror docs, if you will, and has become somewhat of a cult classic in that space. From there, went on to do a number of other documentaries, The Killing Season, which was all the way back in 2015 about the Long Island serial killer case, kind of looking at why it wasn't being solved back then, and other examples of serial murder of sex workers around the country, which also had not been solved, and just asking what was wrong with these broken systems. Also did Murder Mountain, which you can see on Netflix, and The Sons of Sam, also on Netflix. And every now and then I'd like to palate cleanse a little bit with documentaries about animals. So I did a movie called The Search for 52, The Loneliest Whale, also on Netflix. And then most recently, I just did a film called Checkpoint Zoo about 5 people who save over 5,000 animals from a zoo in Ukraine during the war. It's kind of bonkers story.
I know we're going to talk about another topic today, but I do want to ask about that and how, I don't know, intensive that was, because that's a lot of heavy. You said cleanse the palate, which is kind of interesting. Those are all very heavy things that you just cleansed your palate with.
I guess, I like other mysteries besides crime mysteries, and our relationship with animals is such a unique and interesting mystery to me. Like, why do we love whales so much? And the idea of a lonely whale specifically, because 52 is a whale that calls out at a frequency that no other whale can understand. And so they call him the loneliest whale in the world. And then everybody all around the world's like, oh, the loneliest whale. Like, it gets some people. And so the question is why? And I think interestingly enough, that may be due to the internet, which we find atomizes us. And then Checkpoint Zoo, many filmmakers or creators like to look at war. It makes no sense, but we still do it over and over again. We're in a war right now. Why does that happen? And so I wanted to do a war story, and I found an article on the front page of the New York Times about these people who are saving these animals. And it was just so amazing. And they sent me some footage. I called up the dude in Ukraine. He sent me some footage back. And he said, would you like to see a piece of footage that went viral? And I'm like, yes. And then he sent me this shot of a dude driving a Sprinter van. And he's like, we are evacuating animals. We're in like the first month of the war. And he points the camera back behind him and he shows all these kangaroos in the back of a van. It's like the cutest thing ever. And so I'm like, oh, you got to make a movie about this. This is just amazing. And it ended up being wicked emotional.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, how attached do you get to the subjects when your subjects are animals?
So it's weird because these dudes were like, we want to do it like Tarantino, like Where Eagles Dare or Inglourious Bastards, because this was a mission impossible for them. And like, we're going to go save these animals. And like, we're going in, past like flaming cars and through, checkpoints and stuff. And I was like, these people are nuts. But then when I got to Ukraine, I went to Ukraine twice. Everybody's like, were you scared? I was like, And they're like, why? I was like, because we're like doing God's work. It's about animals, and so you just get this like somewhat invincible feeling because you're like saving totally innocent creatures that need to be saved. It's a moral imperative. When you have a moral imperative, you really like go hard with it.
Wow, very cool. Well, yeah, congrats on the success of Checkpoint Zoo. Let's pivot to Rex Heuermann. So you've done a lot of work on this case and the story of him being a serial killer. You've got a new podcast, Monster Hunting the Long Island Serial Killer, and you've got a YouTube channel, Sinister with Josh Zeman, that is excellent. I've been watching it, and some of your interviews are just excellent. I guess what I'd first like to know is, what were your thoughts when you heard that Rex was about to plead guilty?
Well, we had been thinking that there might be a chance that he would plea, or that there was going to be a plea bargain. What we had no idea was that he was going to change his plea without a plea bargain from guilty to not guilty. That blew us away. But we had some inkling because he had lost all these motions to suppress the DNA, to split up the cases. The evidence against this guy was overwhelming. You had DNA evidence. He had articles from all of the crimes, articles going back 30, like all the way back to 1993, like in his house or in his office. There was images. He had over 100,000 images on his computer. He had a document that they found called the HK planning document, hunt and kill planning document. And in this, I've never seen a document like this. It like lists out all these things like burn this and get more sleep for more playtime and make sure the crossbar that you hang these victims from is securely attached. It was nuts. It was terrifying.
Going back to the plea, so you said that, and I think a lot of people thought that there would be a plea, some sort of plea bargain. What were you anticipating there? What were some of the details of what the plea would look like?
What I thought the plea would look like?
Yeah.
So in New York State, there's no death penalty, right? So that's off the table. So we were thinking, he had written these letters to Keith Jesperson, the smiley face killer, asking about like the conditions, like, do you get butter for your bread? Or what's the food like? And so we were like, he's really interested in his food. He's really interested in like his creature comforts for the rest of his life because he knows he's going to jail. So we were expecting it would be something about that. Like there would be some kind of like, hey, I want a bigger cell. He's, by the way, he's huge, right? He's like 6'4", 300 pounds. I think he could probably, stretch out and touch all the sides. He's like Ed Kemper big.
So this would have been more like a personal thing. Like I want to make sure that I'm comfortable in here for the remainder.
Look, if you're going to go to jail for the rest of your life, and jail sucks, right? Like the food's terrible, like it's not cushy, I think you're going to start bargaining for a mattress for the rest, a better mattress for the rest of your life, better food for the rest of your life. It's not insane that he might do that.
Right. Because everything's up for negotiation, I guess.
I mean, I guess the district attorney's like, we're not negotiating anything, but I think everything's negotiable in life.
So now, did Rex actually agree to help sort of provide information to the FBI on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Can you talk about that? So he's basically turning into Hannibal Lecter?
Well, so I was lucky enough to be in the courtroom for when this actually went down, and there was like 150 press, and it was nuts, and there were so many family members, and so I was lucky enough. I got there like 5:30 in the morning, standing outside to be let in at 9. And so we get in there, and we hear a lot of what's going on, but the district attorney is talking like, did you do this? And you brought this individual back, and terrible, horrible stuff. You strangled this person and you dumped them. Yes, I did this. Yes, I did this. Yes, I did this. And then he says, and you agree that part of your plea, you will agree to be interviewed by the FBI's behavioral science unit. And I was sitting next to two journalists I know, and one of the journalists says that I did this. I went, how you like put your hands on other people's knees. So she's like, you grabbed me. And I was like, I was shocked. This is a big thing. This is a big moment. That doesn't happen often. Like, you're agreeing to be interviewed by the behavioral science unit. They're basically elevating him to like the pantheon of high-end serial killers. It's not it's a disgusting thing at the same time. But here's the crazy thing. When he was doing all these crimes, he was reading Mindhunter, the book that became the TV show. He's reading that book to see how he can stay one step ahead of the investigators. And then here, he's pleading, and they're like, okay, now do you agree to be interviewed? And he's like, yes, I do. It was bonkers.
Yeah, of course he's going to say yes, because that not only like feeds his own ego, it inflates his sense of worth, especially in that serial killer. It's so bizarre, that serial killer orbit. He's now amongst the greats, and this is certification that that's true. Do you think that that's deserved? As gross as it is, do you think that that's deserved?
I do.
Yeah, right?
Again, not to kind of go down this path that we all know is super sensational and feeds this, tragedy over and over, because other people are going to, be fed by it who might want to do this. But Rex Heuermann is worthy of that, because he bridges the gap between the, they called it like the heyday of serial murder in the 1970s and 1980s. You're talking Gary Ridgway, Ted Bundy, guys like that, the golden age of serial murder. And then the serial murders of today who use technology, and it's about burner phones and Backpage and going online and finding all the ways that they think they can evade law enforcement from what they've learned from reading these books and watching all these TV shows. So that's super interesting to me, that I guess they kind of anointed him in some respects. And you may say, well, that's gross. Why would they do that? There is a lot to learn from a guy like Rex. He is unique in that he is a hardcore sexual sadist. You are talking about a dude who basically gets off on the lack of consent in tying people up, hearing them scream for their lives, and gets off on them being totally terrified. And that is a totally sick individual. And you need to learn, like, how does somebody like that get created?
Yeah, and you know what? Tim made a joke about, like, is he Hannibal Lecter now? And when you just said that, it reminds me of like the famous line from Silence of the Lambs where Dr. Chilton says it's so rare to capture one alive. And I feel like that is the case here, that it is so rare to capture one of Rex's alive, like one of the Rex types alive. And if you're going to do it, then you might as well not allow the opportunity to waste away in prison.
Yeah, I agree. There is a lot to learn. The question also is, we were wondering, because there's no trial, are investigators going to try and maybe learn some details that they can use to uncover some of his other victims? Because we believe there are not we, the collective we, the DA, everybody's like, he's got other victims out there. There are other victims he did not admit to for specific reasons. And so they say as part of that agreement, none of this will be used for investigative purposes, but I think maybe on the down low, that will happen.
Yeah, I would think so, right? I mean, if he's potentially the killer for other cases, because otherwise, I guess how is the information about him being considered valuable? Like, how is it being applied then? Otherwise,
well, I'm not part of the behavioral science unit, but I could tell you what I was going, but I've spoken to many of them, and I could tell you what I learned. A lot of it is what creates this type of individual. And it goes back to the whole nature versus nurture argument or, discussion. And that is still an evolving discussion as to where we are as a society. And they say it's, genetics loads the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. And I thought that was very interesting. And Rex has some unique traits which made him like he is. One, his unique size. And that's why he followed Ed Kemper, who was also huge. It led to bullying, which was really unique and weird. Not unique that serial killers get bullied, because Joel Rifkin, another Long Island serial killer, got totally bullied, and he's like in the same, just literally like neighborhoods away. But like he's such a huge guy, and he gets bullied. And I was speaking to a childhood friend. I was like, "Oh, the guys must have bullied him," and he's like, "No, the girls bullied him like crazy." Like he would ask them out and they would laugh in his face. And I was like, oh, yeah, I could see that. Like, so it's the bullying and then against the girls, and then he gets revenge fantasies. You have to have a big fantasy world. You have to be able to like really conjure up big fantasies. And this happens coincidentally right at puberty. So you start to like sexualize the revenge fantasies, but you also have to be a narcissist. And you also kind of like have to have a lack of place to go for help. So his dad was an alcoholic who beat him up all the time. So it's like this really intricate mix. And people will be like, well, I was bullied. I'm not a serial killer. I agree. Many people were bullied and not a serial killer. But it's this kind of unique cocktail that creates a guy like Rex. And that's, I think, what they need to learn. The interesting thing is, if we're talking about men being bullied, and the manosphere and all this other stuff, we should all be saying, oh, that sounds like incel, dude to go shoot up schools. It's like Rex, you may say, would have been an incel, the perfect patient zero of that, but he decided to become a serial killer versus like shoot up a school.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program. It's interesting that you said the part about how people will react when they hear that, and they'll say, well, I was bullied.
Yeah.
Not every girl that I asked out said yes.
Me too.
Yeah. I mean, some of them laughed at me, but then there's the other elements, I didn't have a violently abusive childhood. I don't believe I'm a narcissist.
You're also not like in high school, apparently he was like 6'4". So it's like a Shrek type of thing, this kind of big dumb oaf. So, and he had a family that was hunters. Like they took him hunting. Like the thing that he excelled at was not group sports, but marksmanship. So it's a lot of things coming together to create this unique cocktail of an individual.
It's so sort of a mind F to like wrap your head around that, because
totally,
like one element could flip that switch. And then like the time period that he came about in, where Mindhunter was published as a book, and he was able to capitalize on the success of a writing piece like that, and then the subsequent television show, and then other types of media broadcasts that portrayed that sort of like educational groundwork for him.
Right when he was like, I think it was like 25 or 26, like Silence of the Lambs came out. And even that is part of this formation. Like, how much was that as part of his thing? It's just so So I think that was probably part of it. Like, there's people who are like, oh my God, Hannibal Lecter, he's kind of cool, but dangerous, So I think that all comes into play in terms of what we're affected by and how we manifest some of our issues.
So speaking of narcissism, then the change in plea, was that a narcissistic move on his part to like rob people of a trial and rob the victims' families of seeing like actual justice happen?
Good question. There's a couple things else. So remember when I said there's probably other victims that he never mentioned, but that he didn't mention? Well, another individual who was found on Ocean Parkway in his like quote unquote trophy garden was somebody known colloquially as Asian Doe. That is a Asian descent individual who was wearing women's clothes, but was biologically male. And that individual was beaten and not tortured in the same way, let's say. So there's the idea that Rex, in addition to these young petite women, which was his main victimology, might have also been experimenting. And we have his Google searches, and on his Google searches, he's looking up transsexuals. He's looking up a term called Asian twink, which is a kind of effeminate Asian individual. Some people have said, again, all allegation, we don't quite know, but they say he was protecting his family from embarrassment. But I think in a narcissistic sense, he was protecting himself from embarrassment. He didn't want it to be known that maybe he was frequenting transsexuals. He didn't want it to be known that maybe he had other proclivities. His Google searches are terrifying and horrifying. And I asked the police chief the other day on a show, I was like, what, can you give us one thing that you didn't make public? And he's like, sure, Nazi rape. I was like, oh, he had like, just the worst sexual assault things that you've seen. So I think he was probably protecting himself. I think he probably did not want his family to know about the horrific, terrible things that he did to these women, because he sees his family in a transactional way from a narcissistic standpoint.
A transactional way, just something to get him from one identity to the other.
Yeah. The question is, how do narcissists view relationships? Is it viewed upon love and empathy and true friendship, or do narcissists look at relationships more transactionally? What can I get? What can I give? What do I need from this person? And I think whether it's validation, whether it's a beard so that you could go and continually commit these crimes, whether it's support, I think he was very invested in this idea that to his family, he was a hero and a savior. They've actually said that, quoted on the Gilgo House of Secrets Peacock doc. Because he rescued his previous wife. He rescued his wife from an abusive relationship. So she always calls him like my savior. Well, I think for a guy who's also a serial killer and a narcissist, he's probably grooming her so that she views him that way, so that he can do no wrong. So that when he leaves the house for stretches at a time, she's like, oh, he's great. I don't know where he is.
Holy shit.
I mean, but this dude lived and breathed serial killing. And when you want to get away with that, he's a planner, he's an architect. I think he had a whole blueprint in his brain for how he was going to do this. And here's the thing, he got away with it for a long time. Since his first victim is in 1993. I believe that there's another victim previous to that.
Yeah. So can we go into that? I guess how many murders did he plead guilty to, and then how many others is he suspected of?
So he was indicted for 7 murders. They have DNA, everything. But there's 10 individuals who were found on Ocean Parkway. So he pled. He was indicted for 7, and he actually pled to 8. He threw an additional victim in there and said, I'm responsible for this. It was a woman. It was not the man that I think he was trying to keep, not the transsexual that he was trying to keep quiet. We believe he is at least, it depends. I asked the district attorney afterwards, and he's like, it doesn't matter what I believe, it matters what I can prove. And that's important. So it's believed at least 2 more, if not 3, if not more. But I'm not one of those people who's like, oh my God, he's the biggest serial killer ever. When you put it out there, they're like, people's minds they watch a lot of TV. So it just explodes in terms of like how big this guy is. I don't think he's like that, but there's definitely a couple more.
Now, do you think he had any help at any point?
No.
Lone wolf.
No, I don't. Yeah, lone wolf. The irony here is that Suffolk County is rife with corruption. Suffolk County police had their own issues with sex workers, meaning they were frequenting sex workers in a kind of bad lieutenant sort of way, like partying. So they didn't want what they were doing, their partying kind of being uncovered. And they happened to also be partying 5 miles from where these women went missing. And they were partying with sex workers, escorts, cocaine, blah, 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 boogie nights type of thing after some of the women were found, which is just kind of disgusting. So I think the help that he had was he picked Suffolk County. He picked a really great place to commit these crimes because they had so many issues of their own. And interestingly enough, that's something that we see in other cases of unsolved in other cases of serial murder. Serial killers do what they do. Yes, they're compelled, but they also do it to think they can get away with it. And it's very interesting to note that a lot of places that have had serial murder, like Cleveland or things like that, they happen in places where the police department is usually under consent decree, meaning there's some sort of problem with the police department corruption. So these guys do it because they think they can get away with it because the police department is so screwed up.
These guys do it because they think they can get away with it because the police departments are so screwed up.
I don't think it's that logical for them, but I think they're compelled to do it. But there's another part of them that says, can I get away with it? There is self-preservation. And it just so happens when they're saying, can I get away with it? That usually means, am I going to get caught? And so we went and looked. I'm trying to think of all the places that we went, but there are a number of them. Cleveland for sure, Albuquerque, there were even Long Island previously. A lot of these places that have these unsolved serial killer cases that we were looking at had police departments that were under federal governance because of corruption. And it kind of makes sense when you start to think about it in that, I'm going to do this. Can I get away with it? Yeah, the cops here suck. Yeah, I could get away with it.
I've never heard that before. That is incredible. And I know that they're not deliberately I don't know, maybe some of them are Google searching worst police departments in America. But when they've identified wow, the police department here has got some issues, I could probably get away with this. That's incredible to me.
I think it's probably one thing wow, I didn't get caught yet. That's amazing. For Rex Heuermann, it's wow, I got away with it. Wow. And maybe it's just it's a very subtle thing. I got away with it once. I'm going to do it again. I got away with it again. I got away with it again. For Rex, he was dismembering these women. Tragedy. And I just want to say, for the victim standpoint, and all these conversations that we're having, not to diminish, these individuals. And the horrible thing is that we talk about these victims, we keep bringing up the worst day that they've ever had. The day that they were murdered, and it's tragic. So I just want to state that. But these guys, they commit one murder and then they think they can get away with it. That's how it works, So they're doing it because they get away with it the first time. It's very sequential like that. And with Rex, he was first dismembering his victims and then he stopped dismembering. And the question is, everybody's why? And it's because he wasn't getting caught. He didn't have to go through so much trouble.
Yeah, he was probably looking at it in a very realistic, like you said, architectural way.
Yeah.
Part of my plan was dismembering. It seems like that's sort of a time suck right now. So let's not. That's taken too much time. And honestly, it's probably too. It's probably too exhausting to have to clean up all of that, get it prepared, and do the whole maintenance for that whole thing. So, yeah.
There's receipts of him calling the rotor-rooter drain people.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. It's labor intensive and it doesn't, go away easy and quote unquote, it's overkill,
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about this John Bitrolf guy?
Yeah. So the other tragedy of this whole thing is that, let's pick 1993, right? When Rex's first victim that we know. Well, Rex wasn't the only guy killing sex workers in Long Island. In fact, there were 4 other serial murders active in Long Island during 1993. Another guy by the name of John Bitroff, who killed 2 individuals. Another guy by the name of Robert Schulman, who also killed 5 sex workers. And Joel Rifkin, who killed 17. So that is both astounding, also just goes to show what a screwed up place Long Island is. You know, that's what happens when you try to have like the ultimate bedroom community. You just create monsters. And one of those individuals was this guy, John Bitroff, and he is a carpenter. And the crazy thing about John Bitroff is, listen to this. John Bitroff kills his first victim, a sex worker, in, I think it's November of 93. 2 weeks later, Rex Heuermann decides to kill at least the first victim that we know of, a woman by the name of Sandra Castilla, 2 weeks later. And then Bitroff kills another sex worker like 2 months later. So how is it that you've got 2 individuals who supposedly don't know each other are decide to start killing within 2 weeks of each other? It's just bonkers. It's nuts.
And they were both leaving their victims in the same area, right?
Well, I mean, we think it's the same area, but it's really like 5 to 10 miles away. So is that the same area? It depends. But what's really nuts is that Rex Heuermann, for later victims, decides to deposit his victims in an area called Manorville. Dismembered. John Bitroff lives in Manorville. Was this coincidence? And cops will tell you there's no such thing as coincidence. So why is Rex Heuermann and this other guy starting at the same time, and then later Rex Heuermann is depositing remains in John Bitroff's hometown, home village? It's bizarre. And we start, that's when you're kind of like either Spidey sense or your Netflix movie sense kicks in, and you're like, wait a second, are they connected? Or what's going on here? They're also both hunters, and we thought that there was a kind of connection in the hunting world. Like, did 2 dudes who go out hunting for deer, does one of them say another? Did they pass each other? Did they know each other from the hunting community? Like, do they say something about killing a deer that somehow sparks another one to think that, he's not really talking about deer. He's talking about killing people. It's crazy, but I've spoken to serial murderers who were truckers, and they say to me that they'll hear somebody on the CB talking about things, and like they have like an innate sense of that guy has killed a woman before.
So using like code?
I think it's, look, I think when you're into weird stuff, I don't really know, but, if you're into weird stuff, you kind of look for the signs, When I was young looking for weed, I managed to find the guys who had weed, so, and I wasn't yelling like, anybody got weed here? So.
Well, that's a great relatable comparison to I think what you were trying to say there. It's like, yeah, I mean, maybe they just recognize each other. Like there's something unspoken there. That is terrifying to think of. You're really creeping me out here with this topic.
Sorry.
Not your fault.
Yeah, not your fault. We asked you to come on.
I really loved the interview that you did with Vernon Geberth on your podcast. A fantastic conversation. He really is so knowledgeable and had some incredible, insightful things to say about serial murder and the whole thing. So I urge our listeners to check that conversation out. It was really interesting how he was talking about the moment after a serial killer kills somebody and where they choose to dump them or what they choose to do after that, and just kind of going through the psychology of how that works out. It was just, wild.
First of all, that guy, I had his book somewhere right around here, but I'm going to get it for you. It's unbelievable. So this is the godfather of crime. And this is the dude who writes a textbook, Practical Homicide Investigation. This is not a small book, FYI. This is a huge book. And he wrote a textbook, and he is known as the Godfather. And this is a terrifying textbook, by the way. And, it just shows you how to investigate crime. So he's wicked knowledgeable. But he's also, as you can tell, he's not PC at all. So I'll tell you how it is, like an old cop who happens to also be a profiler. So like that is a very interesting and fun mix to talk to him. He's like, that's bullshit. But he really did say something. That exact point that you just brought up, Tim, was the point. I was like, oh, that's so interesting. So the most stressful moment for any serial murder is when they're transferring the body to where it's going to be deposited. Usually, and in this case, from the house to wherever he's going to pick. This is where they usually get caught. This is where Joel Rifkin gets caught. This is where a lot of people, Ted Bundy with the light, this is where a lot of people get caught, is in having the body, on their person per se and depositing it. So they're in a highly stressed moment, like, I hope I don't get caught. I hope I don't get caught. And then finally they dump the body and like kind of step back and get free. And it's this huge rush of adrenaline, like the emotion and this calm, like, oh, I just got away with it. And that unbelievable relief and euphoria is then mapped to that location. And if they don't get caught, and if nobody finds it, that becomes then their, I don't like to use the word dumping ground, trophy garden. They will then continue to bring bodies back to that point because it's locked in with this euphoric moment. And some individuals, it's interesting, the other thing he told me, some individuals are like, sorry to be kind of gross here, but some individuals will go back and engage with the body, masturbatory, what have you. But a sexual sadist typically doesn't do that because it's not about the physical act of sex. It's about the fear that they had. They just like to drive by and know that their victims are there. That's what gets them off, more of a kind of like, drive-by scenario. And that's what Rex did. He put him along this highway because he liked to drive along this highway and see all of his victims like trophies on a wall.
It's horrifying. Wow.
More horrifying stuff for me.
Yeah, no, it's all good. We're learning a lot. We're learning a lot. As horrifying as it is, we're learning a lot. In your opinion, do you think that he thinks he got caught, or do you think that he allowed himself to get caught?
Good question. He supposedly spent all this time trying not to get caught. If you look at his planning document, he's got all these things like, don't get gas when you're going out to deposit the body. He's counting the number of highway cameras as to where he's going. He's saying burn everything, use bleach, wash all cavities. He's got a huge list of ways he's not going to get caught. And he's like, prevent DNA. Yet his family's DNA was on all of the victims through tape transfer because he kept taping them up. So despite the fact that he makes all these precautions, he's using tape and it's getting everywhere. He's leaving little hints that are getting him caught. He's got trophies, magazine articles over for 30 years in his bedroom, in the magazine articles about the crimes. He's keeping old Palm Pilots from like 1995, and it gives the date of like, my wife is away. And he's keeping old burner phones. Oh, and he's using like commercial grade, like cleaning, like wipe my hard drive software, but he still keeps the hard drive, or like he's using a burner phone. But note for anybody out there, when you use a burner phone, don't always keep the burner phone next to your regular phone because they'll just ping the burner phone, get the number that's next to it, and then just track the regular phone. So they're able to like link him up every time because he's like, hold on a second. So it's like a boomer trying to figure it out, did these crimes. It's like, bro, you really weren't that smart. You thought you were smart. You thought you were counting the number of cameras, but who cares if you're leaving all this evidence and you're keeping Palm Pilots from like 1995, which basically state wherever you are. So does that mean he wants to get caught? I don't know. It's just stupid. It's just, you're not the smart. You're never as smart as you think you are.
Yeah, it made me think about like that saying that may probably not be true, where we say, you know, they want the relief of not having the burden of doing this and the stress of having to cover it up. It doesn't sound really like that was his scenario.
No, for him, I think he was just aging out. You know, he's 63. And it's another interesting thing when you learn about how these guys work. And I didn't really know all this. Like, I just went totally down this path to ask, you know, and I was like, well, you know, like, can you even get it up at 63? You know, so what does that mean for a serial killer? And they're like, no, it's, you know, you lose a libido. You're not, you know, you don't want to like kill as much, you know, it's just, you know, you're too tired. Can't get off the couch, you know?
Right. Yeah. So naturally, the libido starts to decline, and their, rage probably a little bit too.
You know, and just like, you know, normal dudes, the testosterone, you know, goes down, and, you know, whether it's lazy or whether it's rage or whatever, it all subsides. And I think, you know, at some point it just becomes too much, whether it's the planning, the action, what have you, or it's just, you know, you don't get as much enjoyment from it. You know, again, he's been doing it for 20 years. So just think of hobbies that you had that, oh yeah, I love golf for like those 10 years, you know, or something like that, you know?
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Are there any other unsolved serial killer cases that you follow like this?
Yeah. So when we did this show, The Killing Season, you could see it on A&E, also on, I think, Amazon. The original pretense was to look at all these crimes that were seemingly connected, in that they were all sex worker murders, and people on the internet were like, it's all one super duper serial killer. And like, we kind of knew it wasn't one super duper serial killer, but it was interesting to kind of engage that idea. And Rex had traveled to Atlantic City, or LISK, you know. So they were like, why are there 4 serial murders here, 4 serial murders there? So Atlantic City has 4 sex workers who were killed. That case has never been solved. And it's, again, a police department or a district attorney's office that refuses to get a lot of information. You're talking about victims who people deemed as throwaways. And you're talking about Atlantic City, you know, Sin City type of thing. You know, what happens in AC stays here, or something like that. So that's one case. Albuquerque, there's a lot of women murdered in Albuquerque on the Mesa. They call them Mesa Bone Killer. And that's another very tragic case of a lot of women who are killed. There's tragically a lot of cases like this happening. And it's because those individuals who want to go after, you know, they choose sex workers because of the victimology, because it's easier and because it's anonymous over Craigslist or whatever they're using today as the way to do that. And, you know, serial murderers these days, they don't go after the hitchhikers. Nobody hitchhikes anymore. We become so infinitely trackable that the only victim that you're going to go after is one who doesn't want to be tracked.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that what Rex Heuermann has to say when he's interviewed for the behavioral science unit, and they give him the criteria or whatever, the questions that he needs to answer, I think what he has to say is going to be probably a little bit more surprising than I would expect, depending on how candid he gets. And I'm wondering if you ever have the opportunity to sit down with him, what types of questions you would want asked to first break the ice, but then maybe sort of, or sort of ingratiate yourself with him. Would you ever take that opportunity to get into his head?
Yes. Yeah. Because I would just try and come at it like some super fan, and I only say that in an effort to get information from him where I wouldn't be a threat. He'd be like, I'll tell you, kid, here's all the things I did. So if I can come as like, it's just me, asking. The one thing is, we know that he watched everything about him. He didn't want to get caught. So he was reading documentaries. He was reading books. And our documentary came out in 2015. I firmly believe he watched our documentary. Firmly believe. So I was going to write to him and I didn't, but I'd be like, I've been trying to find you for 10 years and see if that would be a way to break the ice. Like, because we did all these things, we were putting ads on Backpage, which was the site that we know he perused, saying, we have information about the Long Island serial killer. We're looking for somebody who can help confirm our details. Please give us a call. And people called us. A whole bunch of people thought Rex Heuermann had actually called us. I don't believe it was Rex Heuermann. Inside Edition believes it was Rex Heuermann, but I think Inside Edition, But so I think he knew we were trying to play a little bit of cat and mouse. So I think that would be my way in. It's an interesting question. There's 2 victims on Ocean Parkway who we always thought were Rex's victims, Tatiana and Tanya Denise Jackson. There's a mother and a toddler. And these individuals were found on Ocean Parkway. The toddler is found only 212 feet from one of Rex's admitted victims. But he never admitted to Tatiana and Tanya. And it's also in Nassau County. It's not in Suffolk where these crimes occurred. And the DA in Nassau County actually ended up indicting another individual, I guess for lack of a better word, her baby daddy, who had another family, a guy by the name of Andrew Dykes. And I don't believe Andrew Dykes did it. I believe Rex did it. There's reasons why you would believe Andrew Dykes did it. He was the baby daddy. He was paying child support right up until the day when they disappeared. He didn't tell anybody. I think he was very selfish about this other relationship that he had. He had actually had sex with this woman, not to, like, his DNA was found inside her. But I still don't believe he did it. And maybe I'm being naive, but it's because of where the bodies are found in proximity to Rex's other victims. And this is a 25-mile stretch of road. Like, the chances of this guy going in and dropping a body part next to one of Rex's victims only 212 feet away along a 25-foot stretch of road, like, it would have to be the most mind-blowing coincidence. Could happen. So I don't believe that the guy that the Nassau County DA who they've indicted is the actual perpetrator. I believe it's Rex. I believe Rex didn't want to come clean because he didn't want to admit to killing a baby. I think he had tried to solicit the mother, and she had brought the baby with her, and he didn't know about it. And then he was forced to do it. I could totally be wrong. And maybe I'm falling into the same trap of watching too much television, but there's just things that lead me to believe. So I'd like to ask him about that, because right now, that baby will never get justice because the baby is in Suffolk County and the mother has been deposited in Nassau County. So it's a Nassau County case for Andrew Dykes and the woman, but they can't go link him to the baby. They can't link that guy to the baby. So the baby is always, and the Suffolk County DA doesn't have any evidence. So that baby will never get justice.
And what does Andrew Dykes say about it? Is he like adamantly
against it? The minute he was arrested, his son called me and he's like, my dad didn't do this. My dad was a state trooper. They tried to say that this woman was like going to blow the whole thing wide open and tell the family that he had another family. He's like, we knew. My mother knew. The army knew, because they were trying to say he would lose his pension. He'd be like, no, we would go to things, and my mother would say, like, see that little girl? That's your sister. So the question is, why would this DA do it? Well, go listen to the DA's press conference, and I think you'll understand why the DA decided to get some glory and prosecute this guy. It's amazing in this day and age that we could still have people falsely accused of crimes, but I am naive and it happens all the time. Yeah, that's Peaches. That's the Peaches case. And if you look at Peaches, you'll find that for years, everybody's like, it's Rex. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, the Nassau County DA arrests this guy.
You need another cleanser project. I need a cleanser project.
Actually, you know what I'm doing next is actually we're supposed to find out tomorrow. I'm going to be going to New York City court because the Supreme Court is making a decision about whether they're going to hear the case of a guy by the name of Pedro Hernandez, who's the guy who theoretically killed Eitan Pates. He's the guy who admitted to it, but it's believed that that's a false confession. He was tried back in 2015, hung jury. Tried again in 2017, convicted. Last year, the appellate judges overturned that conviction. Now the DA is asking the Supreme Court to pick it up and see if they're going to reverse. And if he doesn't, that case is going to go to trial. So there's a trial coming up that we'll be covering. It is that of Pedro Hernandez, a false confession case, I believe, although I could be wrong. And it's, Eitan Pates. Eitan Pates is literally the first milk carton kid, the kid whose disappearance in New York City in 1979 created stranger danger. And I've always been fascinated by this because of the missing children case that I did in Cropsey. We always would talk about it and everybody's like, this was the number one missing kid in New York City, was always Eitan Pates. It'll be very interesting because he disappeared in 1979. And if the trial is going to happen, it'll be 2026. It's the second longest crime to trial cases in U.S. history.
Wow, what's the first one?
Another missing kid case. That was like 55 years.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Well, the interesting thing is when you have a case that old, none of the witnesses are still around.
And it just gets harder with every day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow. Well, Joshua, thank you so much for hanging out with us today and chatting with us. This was a great conversation. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, thanks very much, guys. Really appreciate it.